Okay, so yesterday, at the time of filming, Xbox revealed their latest partner showcase, which is, as the name heavily implies, just a showcase of games coming to Xbox, many of which I guess will be coming to other systems too. Lots of games there, plenty to wade through. And I guess, well, we could be here all day, but let's just choose maybe the top five that that sort of caught our eye. Let's begin with FBC Firebreak from Remedy, which was the sort of one final thing at the end. This is looking quite cool. Remedy is producing a first-person co-op shooter. They're saying it's within the Control universe, but the Control universe is the Alan Wake universe, is it not? It's the Remedy universe. Even so, I'm not quite sure what to make of the gameplay, but John, what do you think of this?
Uh, Unexpected to say the least, I will say.
Yes.
Because this is something kind of outside of Remedy's usual wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But I will say that as someone that normally does not engage with these types of multiplayer shootery things so much anymore, conceptually speaking, this did at least capture my interest to some degree, where I got some of the mechanics they showed, like what do you call that thing where he basically does like a rocket jump with it at one point. It's like a cement pounding thing. I don't know what you call it, but it was like I was like, wait, is that like a rocket jump? That's really cool. It looks fun. It's got a cool aesthetic, and I kind of feel like Remedy always has like unique hooks to their games, which makes me think that this could stand out as something, again, somewhat different. But of course, every developer entering the multiplayer fray these days is faced with a significant challenge where if it does not catch on pretty much right away, it could spell doom for it. It's no longer all that feasible to launch just a straight multiplayer game and actually support it long term if it doesn't find that player base relatively quickly.
Well, they're
But
pulling out the stops here by making it available on both Game Pass and PlayStation Plus at launch.
and I think that right there is probably a key factor here that might help its success. Because yeah, this is like when you look at something like Concord, for instance, beyond the fact that it wasn't very appealing, the fact that it was a game that you had to purchase first and then you get to play it, that is a gigantic barrier for a game like this, where when it's available on these services, it definitely encourages people to check it out, because like, oh, well, I'll just give this a shot and see how this is. And if it's good enough, maybe it'll actually hit. And I think that because of you couple that with this unique Remedy aesthetic and some of the interesting things they have going on in here, and maybe it'll be a hit. I hope so for their sake.
Oliver, what do you think?
Yes, yes. Well, I think I think it looks really great, actually. I like co-op shooters a lot more than competitive ones, typically in these multiplayer titles. And I think
Same.
the scope is pretty reasonable, what they're doing here for a game like this. Like, they're talking about a mid-price game. Thomas Pua was kind of talking down on the idea that this is a live service title. It's not necessarily a live service title. They're aiming to basically get this out the door and have it be like a complete experience on day one that's not all about chasing loot in every single instance, right? And I'd like it if they approach this with some kind of single player component as well. Like, it could be played solo, because that's kind of the way that I tend to like to play these games sometimes, especially now that like my friends only seem to want to play Helldivers, so I'm pretty much stuck there in terms of a multiplayer squad. And one thing I liked here, though, is, like John said, the rocket boosting and like the really wide open environments and the very creative use of weapons and stuff like that. Like, it looks like a fun game to interact and play with, and not just like some pretty standard multiplayer zombies type shooter that we've seen so many times throughout the years. It looks like it's an interesting twist on the genre, and hopefully it'll be a successful title.
Well, I'll tell you what, I looked at the post-trailer PR, and one thing's just jumped out to me is that they don't expect you to be spending an hour tweaking your loadouts. And
Oh, thank God.
yes, because I just don't engage with that mechanic whatsoever. I just find it friction to actually getting into the game and
100%.
having some fun. But there's always the fear that if you don't do it, then you're going to be at a disadvantage.
I think the thing
So-
about that, Rich, is that everyone's doing it now, and so by being a
Right.
game that doesn't do that, you automatically stand out.
Hmm. I mean, all I can really say is go back and play the original Quake. It's still one of the greatest multiplayer shooting experiences of all time, and the reason why is that it's completely friction free, and you just jump in, have fun. That's all there is about it. In terms of what we're looking at here with FBC Firebreak, I mean, it's the Remedy Northlight engine. I'm expecting big things from that. Um, what else could I say? I mean, I was sort of taken aback by some of the weapons there, which don't really seem like anything we've seen before in the Remedy verse, but it looks like fun. I was just thinking, based on what I saw there, what would a raw co-op experience for something like Control look like? I think that would be pretty awesome too. I mean, the thing about Remedy is that they've mastered gunplay. Um, several times over. We've seen this sort of iteration. Quantum Break was pretty great in that regard.
Yeah, it was.
Same with Control. And to actually bring that into a co-op experience, and I think pretty much there's so much chaos going on here that PvP just wouldn't really work. So it's kind of got to be co-op. So what can I say? I think it's highly, highly promising. But let's move on. Cronos, the New Dawn. Cronos, the New Dawn. Unreal Engine 5, Bloober Team. There's not really... it was a cinematic, basically, wasn't it, John?
Yeah, basically a cinematic. Did they actually specify? Let me check here. If it was like... Because I noticed on this specific Xbox showcase, they did a better job of putting like cinematic and stuff at the bottom. But I'm not seeing that in the trailer for this, but...
No, it was in the show, but it wasn't in the
actual trailer. Right. Well, I guess the key here is I feel like Bloober Team has earned themselves some additional credibility thanks to Silent Hill 2, which was largely well received. I think most people think they did a good job on it. I'm still waiting for my copy to play it, but everything I've seen suggests that it turned out a lot better than expected. And it's a situation that makes me think about something like, like a Metroid Prime or something where you have a Western studio teaming up with a Japanese company, like in this case, Konami and other creatives there. And I'm wondering if that has had like a positive influence on the way they approach their games. You know what I mean? And I'm curious to see where Bloober Team goes from here with their future projects. And Cronos, has some thematic elements that I found very appealing. The sort of sci-fi stuff, which differs significantly from what they've mostly done. And I guess at the end of the trailer, they showed some gameplay bits here. It looks like walking around in third person, and it looks suitably spooky and aesthetically interesting. I think it's set in a foggy environment, but what it actually called to mind was something like a combination of the Abyss, the film, and Soma, the game, which was my favorite game from the creators of the
Amnesia, was it?
Yeah, I can't remember their name. Whatever, the Amnesia creators, the developers of Amnesia. I feel bad for forgetting their name, but Soma was my favorite game that they made, and part of that was just down to the atmosphere that they delivered here. And this looks to be tackling a similar type of thing, maybe, or it's got that mix of sci-fi and horror down pretty well. So I'm very curious to see what this turns into.
Are you referring to fictional games there, John?
Wow, I would have not pulled that out of my head. Frictional games, huh? Yeah, I haven't heard that name in a while.
Well, I pulled it out of Google.
Nice.
Oliver, thoughts?
Oh, I think this trailer is really something. I mean, just that slice of gameplay at the end, it's so brief, but it does give me big Dead Space vibes, like the way that he's holding that gun, or maybe something a little bit Resident Evil-y, where it's like this slightly slower paced game, hopefully with a bit more of an emphasis on action. Maybe some other prior Bloober Team joints. I think that's really cool. Tech-wise, I think this trailer might be at 24 FPS, or at least it's not super stable here.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so it's that's a little bit curious. It is a cinematic trailer, of course. Primarily, it is a cinematic trailer, and I mean the cinematic section looks absolutely incredible. But nowadays, with UE5 producing a cinematic trailer, you don't really want to read too much into that in terms of how the actual game will look and run. But the section of gameplay looks terrific too. I did notice some slight issues where maybe it looks like the VSM is going a bit awry on some of the smaller foliage elements there, but That's just a very, very minor thing here. I think, like John said, Bloober Team has established themselves as kind of a premier survival horror developer now with Silent Hill 2. It really is quite exciting stuff what they're doing. And I think, like Silent Hill 2, this will probably be a pretty terrific looking UE5 title in a lot of respects.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem to be the case that Bloober Team have, basically been scaling up in their projects, moving from project to project, but just getting ever more ambitious, which I think is really, really cool. We've come a long way from The Medium and its prior titles there. So, looking forward to this one. John, you highlighted Blindfire, which certainly looks interesting, right?
Yeah, so that one...
There is an early access review. It is on early access now, but we've not had the time to play it yet. But the trailer certainly looks great.
Yeah, that's the thing, is we can't really talk in detail about this despite it now arriving. But I thought conceptually, again, I have to say, these sorts of multiplayer shooters don't usually do it for me. But this is another instance where there is like this conceptual idea behind this, where you're essentially fighting in the dark. That's the idea here. The map is very dark, and you're relying on, it looks like there's some scanning through your visor you can do to see certain objects, but it's largely very dark, and it relies on dynamic lights in the environment to sort of attack your foe, from what I can tell here. And I think that's neat. We're not really seeing much in the way of games that sort of leverage the environment in such a way. It reminds me a little bit of what they kind of hinted at with what Doom 3 multiplayer's mode could have been back in the day, where it was just dark areas with the flashlight and everything. But that was obviously still much more visible than this, where this is straight up pitch black with just very subtle outlines, and you're firing around in the dark. I think that's cool. That's all. So I'm actually curious to try it, just to see if I can actually jive with it. Just to,
Another game which sort of stood out in terms of its originality was Mouse PI for Hire. John?
Oh, right. That was so cool. Oh my gosh. Yes. This is obviously going after a similar old cartoon style, not unlike, say, Cuphead. Seems to be no relation to that game, of course. But this is a first-person shooter with some detective elements in it, it seems. But what I love about it is that they've gone for this old-style black and white cartoon aesthetic, and while the world itself is done using normal 3D polygons, it seems like the weapons and the enemy characters are all done with sprites. But they're all fully animated and drawn in that old cartoon style. And it looks awesome in this case. But it also got me thinking more about, I'd love to see more games leverage sprites in this way, because the size and the number of frames of animation in here, this is all stuff that you could not have done prior, right? In the past, when sprite based shooters were big, the memory and the fidelity just was not feasible, and now we can do these gigantic, super detailed character sprites, and I think that's really promising. So how this game will turn out, I don't know, but aesthetically it's really cool. And I think it was actually shown off a while ago, possibly earlier this year. I can't remember, but this is the first I had forgotten completely about it, and then seeing this new trailer was oh yeah, this actually looks freaking awesome. So I'm happy to see it here.
Anything to add, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that kind of jumps out at me is this does remind me a lot of Duke Nukem or Doom or something, just because of that mix between the 3D environments and the sprite-based characters and weapons here. But yeah, I mean, it does look pretty cool here. I'd love to see more of the title, and I think that a lot of the animation work that they have going into the weapons in particular, the firing animations, the reloading animations,
right,
all that stuff, it's really, really high quality stuff, and it feels very, very impactful. They really nailed that. I think that's so critical here in nailing this aesthetic and really putting it together. So I'm excited to see what they do with it for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting merging of a relatively low poly 3D environment, and along with those fantastic sprites. I'm not quite sure when it's coming out. It just says coming 2025. But we'll certainly be looking forward to that one. The final game we want to talk about, John, Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii.
So I kind of want to mention this for a couple of reasons. This game was revealed prior to the Xbox thing, but it's being shown here again, and it just reminded me of just the exceptional work coming out of RGG Studio these days, and how they have seemingly mastered the art of creating very compelling games within a very short time frame, or more like they're able to juggle projects in such a way that they're able to get these out basically at like 1 or even sometimes 2 games a year. And these games are not short. But they've essentially found a formula that works, a framework that works. They've got their technology side down, their art pipelines down, and the proper amount of content reuse for certain types of assets and things. And they've found a way to keep creating new stories. Like, even though these are all individual games that are sold, by themselves, this almost feels like they've somehow stumbled into the old episodic model that was promised to us during the mid 2000s, right? When you hear about Half-Life episode 1 and episode 2 and very like the Sin episodes and all that, they've kind of figured that out, but with like full games where they're able to deliver these big projects at like a regular clip. So much so that at the end of the trailer, even, like, it's almost like just showing off at this point. They showed like the date of February 28th and then they scratched it out and put 21st. It's like, no, we're so good. We're actually bringing the release date forward a week, which is hilarious. And then conceptually speaking, just like the game looks ridiculous. It's another sort of side story thing. They're taking, just they're reveling in this sort of like pirate lunacy. And I'm very curious to see where this actually ends up going and what this becomes, because wow.
Right.
And I wonder if they'll actually be able to squeeze another arcade game in this, because that's been kind of their thing lately, right? Like they did the Sega Racing Classic 2, Daytona USA 2 was in the Man Without a Name release, and then what was in the, I forget which one was in the other. I think VF3 might have been in the other, in the Yakuza 8. I'm blanking on the name, but this one I'm kind of holding out hope, despite the pirate theme, that we might actually see something like Scud Race in here. I feel like that's the natural point of what would be included next.
Any reactions to this one, Oliver?
No, like John said, I mean, I think it's a real break with the modern games industry, and a real special thing that they managed to pump out these games on such a regular basis. I mean, the last title only came out earlier this year, I believe, back in January or February. So this is a pretty insane pace to have. Yeah.
Just before that, they did the side story. The Man Without a Name was like literally like 2 or 3 months before that.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts, isn't it? That's pretty nuts. But I mean, I think, yeah, there's nothing objectionable with the way this game looks. It looks pretty great, actually, I think. Like the environments look awesome. The ship combat, I mean, it's very reminiscent of a certain Assassin's Creed title, or a certain few Assassin's Creed titles, but I think it looks pretty cool here. And yeah, I mean, I just think it's super impressive that they're able to pump these games out on such a regular basis.
Would you describe the ship combat as quadruple A, Oliver?
Yeah, Skull and Bones. Yeah, I suppose that's the non-Assassin's Creed title with the ship combat there. Well, hopefully this game fares a little bit better commercially than Skull and Bones, but that's my only thought there. Yeah.
I've got to ask, that was the 5 games that we chose, but I've got to ask you about this one, John. Wuchang Fallen Feathers.
Oh yeah,
it actually looks pretty good, I think.
It does.
The extent to which there's, I mean, obviously, just due to the way it takes games years to develop, it's not any kind of reaction to Wukong, Black Myth Wukong, but...
Or is it? Because Black Myth Wukong was announced a long time ago, as we know.
But what can I say? That was certainly a bit of a surprise there.
Oh yeah, actually, I mean... It does seem to be another character action game in that style from a Chinese developer. And that's really cool. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious in the last year or so that last few years, I'd say Chinese development is really stepping up. They're producing some big games, some very impressive games, and finding these new markets. So it's pretty cool to see. And visually, this looks great. And I'm always on board for another awesome character action game. And this one seems to have a spear that acts as a chain gun and or flamethrower, which, Wukong did not
historically accurate.
So yeah, this seems to be more like character. Like there's I don't know if it's character classes or what's going on here, but the number of moves and types of magic that the player seems to have access to is quite significant. So I'll be curious to see what you can do there as well.
Mm-hmm. It's coming day one rather to Game Pass, and I'm in 2025, and I'm kind of curious if we're going to be looking at a Wukong versus Wuchang face-off, but only time will tell there.
Two Chinese titans facing off.